power and vulnerability are dualities throughout lives. That I believe that. I believe that there are two rivers that we carry, if we like, in terms of the conversation that we're having today, and both of those things flow through all of us, and we will be in touch with those things throughout our lives or in conflict.
Good people, welcome to another episode of Unlearning Strongwoman. I am your host, Tolu Agbelusi, and my guest today is Dr. Rommi Smith. She is a multi-award winning poet, playwright, librettist, scholar, educator. She is a woman of very, very many talents. These are just a few of them. I am looking forward to getting into this conversation. So welcome to the show, Rommi.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
I always begin with the same question, so I won't, what's the word? Change the wheel. What is a strong woman to you?
It's a really interesting and problematic term, I think. Let's start with the positives then. I think one of the things that I feel is central to the notion or the concept of a strong woman is resourcefulness. Somebody who is able to be resourceful in the midst of difficulty, and life is difficult. So if I think of all the instances of women in my life who might be described as strong women, then it's the women that have taught me to be resourceful because they, by example, have been resourceful in situations or contexts of difficulty or struggle, and they have shown me what a woman or a feminist looks like, but they may never have labeled themselves as such.
Yeah.
But they gave me that in terms of role modeling. I think the problematics for me of strong women exist in terms of the ways in which, and you will be very familiar with this, I know, Black women have disproportionately had that label applied, and it means we are seeing now that play out within healthcare reports that show that Black women disproportionately have their pain thresholds misread. Yeah. So they're assumed to be women who can tolerate high levels of pain, and that's simply not true, or that there's somehow a racialized notion of pain, that sort of Black women are more able to tolerate pain than other women, and that means in certain contexts there is a lack of compassion and a lack of person-centered care that happens. So that's where I find it massively problematic, and I also find it massively problematic any idea that anybody should somehow suffer or tolerate in order to paint a picture of being strong. That's where I struggle with it as an issue. Human beings are capable, as we all know, of vulnerability and strength, and those dualities play themselves out in all of our lives.
Yeah. And if we're talking about, I guess, some of those negative things of being made, I love the way you put it, being made to pretend that you can take or bear a lot of pain just to prove that you're strong. And even that in itself, if you think about it, it can't be strength because you're lying to make a point that does not exist, so that...
Well, you're masking, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that's, if you're masking, then it's not authentically you.
No, which is why I guess for me, the question is always really important, because those things obviously exist. The burden of them exists strongly on a personal level, but as you've just elaborated, also on a systemic level. But then this determining what it is for ourselves then becomes more important then, because it's either we do that or we're left with this picture of this is a strong woman. And then that becomes an anchor around your neck that can pull you down.
I agree with you. I guess my feeling would be that we one can have a personal definition of a term, but that definition is always in a context, and it's speaking to a wider defining of that term. And so for me, it's important to say, well, this is how I regard that term. Resourcefulness is the word that immediately comes to mind. But in defining it as that and thinking about it and meditating on it as that, I'm also aware of the other ways in which the term is used that I refute. And that I refute. So
no, and that's important, because being able to have the resourcefulness, the one that is there for yourself, also then gives you a platform from which you can, not that that is required to refute the other, but it makes the refutation stronger, because we're able to say these are all the other things that it is and can be.
Yeah.
And that other thing is a definition that we have to find a way to minimalize or reduce or completely disrupt and dismantle.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, the point of refutation and dismantling things, because of course, as we know, that notion of particularly Black women being able to tolerate pain has a monolithic history, and that history is a colonial one, and the colonial idea that Black women were incapable, were constructed socio-historically, socio-biologically in terms of scientific racism, constructed as being incapable of feeling pain, or less able, because humanhood was not afforded those Black women. And that's where I push against it, those trace ghosts, residues that are left upon the term, because, I work in the mental health system for part of my life as a writer in residence. I work in maternity health. And I work with women who are experiencing pre and postnatal depression. So I'm meeting women who often in their professional lives are perceived to be, and are indeed, powerful women who lead and etc. But something has happened to them in the journey of having their child or children, in which they have met a crisis. And the crisis is their own profound vulnerability. And that's the point at which we work together. So my definitions are also operative and foundational upon that 25-year experience of working in those contexts as a writer.
Yeah. There's this sense, what you said about powerful women. And actually, when I was writing my collection, I had that in mind a lot, that with powerful women, there's always an assumption of strength, of a position, and yet in private lives of those same women, those assumptions, not that they block access, but they somehow minimize access to a vulnerability that you need to survive. And I was, and still am, really interested in the little moments of strength, which aren't shouting and quote unquote authoritative as a society might see it, but which are nevertheless still strength, because if you need to cry, you cry because your body needs to release, or knowing when to walk away from something as opposed to shouting, also being a representative of strength. But also being able to feel the little things that we just take as, well, that's what you do. As no, you summoned a part of yourself to do that thing. And if you're able to then recognize that as a power that you pulled from, as a strength that you have, then it allows you to also recognize other vestiges of strength that you have in yourself, which we might all minimalize because it doesn't look like how everybody else says it should look.
Sure. And I think that the notion of powerful, when I am talking about it in terms of my definition, doesn't just belong to women who lead or women who in their professional lives are perceived to be powerful. It's everybody. I mean, I think when I said before, power and vulnerability are dualities throughout lives, that I believe that. I believe that There are two rivers that we carry, if we like, in terms of the conversation that we're having today, and both of those things flow through all of us, and we will be in touch with those things throughout our lives, or in conflict with both of those things throughout our lives, depending on where the river of life leads us. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think power or a sense of power belongs to some people. I have been very fortunate in my life. And when we were talking about this conversation before having it, one of the things I was reflecting on was a question you'd asked me about somebody who was powerful in my life, and that would be my mum. Now, my mother left school without an education, without a formal education. She did not pass her 11 plus, so she didn't have a grammar school education, which I believe would have been transformative. And everything that I have done in my educational life is a consequence of everything she gave me. She was, even when I grew up in a two-parent household, she was the one who was giving everything. I mean, she was the one who read the discrimination that I was telling and narrating to her that I was experiencing in the education system at the age of 4. And she was the one who made sure that I knew how to read fluently before I got further into the education system, because she knew what I was going to encounter. The gift of reading, as we all know, as human beings, but particularly as writers, we know, is the biggest gift that you can give any human being, is the access to landscapes of thought and imagination and inquiry and a route of inquiry. And she gave me that. She was persistent with me and patient with me in terms of making sure that I knew how to write, and I knew how to write my own name in joined up letters, and I knew how to read. And that was at the start of the education system, before I got further into that first year of primary school. So she is the one that I think very, very early on taught me what power looks like in terms of quiet, quotidian power that is my mother was somebody who was very just an extraordinary distiller of the magnitude of experience. She would find ways to distill things into few words. She was a woman of few words. She was intensely shy. And actually, I've often reflected on in my life, she wasn't a writer, but that distillation of huge, magnificent, grand experience into few words is exactly what we try to do as poets. Yeah. So in many ways,
She was.
Yeah, I totally see that in her. So yes, she would be the person that I would say, yes.
And it's beautiful to hear you speak about her in this way. Like, obviously, I never met your mother. I don't know her, but I can hear the reverence and the respect is not the word I'm looking for. I can't put my hands on it, but there's a you know, when children are enamored by something, and there's a joy that dances in the way that they speak, and I can hear it in your voice, and which is why I'm smiling a lot. But it's beautiful to hear you speak about her in that way. And when you say resourcefulness, that also then matches up and makes sense.
She was very resourceful. I mean, we grew up in intense poverty, and for a part of my childhood, we were homeless. But she never, ever allowed us to see that, because of how resourceful she was as a human being. And I absolutely credit her with so much of what I've become. I mean, my doctorate was an arduous process for many, many reasons. And the reason why I kept keeping on and persisted was because I was going to do this for my mum. I grew up in a Nigerian household, and my mother, my father, who's Nigerian, had decided I was going to be a doctor when I was very, very small, although he didn't to be fair, do much about encouraging or nurturing that. She was the one to do that. And so I wanted to make that come true. And that's why I did the doctorate, is because I wanted to become a doctor, but not the medical doctor, which my father wanted me to become, because I was never good at sciences. But I was going to become a doctor for my mother and for everything she had done, particularly, and also because of my father's the dreams of an immigrant to this country, of having a child who would become a doctor and in this country. I was going to do that.
Yeah. In the same vein, so if I take your mum as one person who epitomizes your vision of strength in terms of resourcefulness, to expand the question wider, particularly given that you've done a lot of things in various countries, who are two women who you would say widened the sphere of possibility for who you get to be?
Oh, yeah, I can answer that straight. So the person that I need to thank, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity, I think this is the first time on anything that I've been able to talk about her, is Linda Plummer. Linda Plummer changed my life. She changed my life. We're still friends now. We still talk on the phone. She was my school drama teacher. I met her at the age of 12. And she changed my life. She had gone to Rose Bruford to study as a drama teacher. She befriended lots of actors. And I met her at 12 by joining her drama club. And she had not come to play. She was giving, as Georges Fey do, a flea in her ear. She was giving Lady Macbeth. She was giving kids who in no other circumstance felt that they had an entitlement to those texts. She was giving us those texts. And I can always remember, so first of all, when I began to write poetry, she was told this by another teacher, and I was invited to read at a public event with the revered and beloved poet who sadly recently died, Abdul Malik. And I was asked to read at the age of, I think this would have been, I was 14, for a book launch of his. And I hadn't prepared. And I thought, I'm going to decide on the day what I read. Anyway, about 2 weeks before, she learns about this and she comes to me and she says, what are you going to read for that event? I said, oh, I don't know, but I'm going to decide the day before. She went, no, you won't. She went, you'll come and see me and we're going to go through what you're going to read. What are you going to wear? I said, I don't know what I'm going to wear. She said, well, we're also going to talk about that. So she prepped me for 2 weeks in her own time after school every night for that reading. And it never stopped being that way. When I was poet in residence in the Houses of Parliament, it was Linda who was rehearsing me down the telephone where I could find a quiet space. So she has persistently given me her time. I'm a working class kid that grew up in a context with not a lot of money. Everything from Shakespeare through to eating salmon. I had never eaten salmon until I went to Linda's house and she cooked it. I never understood what eating with double sets of cutlery was until I went to her house. So there was a lot that she gave me as a human being that was nurturing, that was beyond generous. And I am grateful to say, still friends now. And she is, in literature terms, she is a mother figure to me, for sure. She's someone I trust profoundly, and she's somebody whose counsel I feel enriched in terms of my life, in terms of having that. And yeah, she has absolutely changed it. There is no doubt whatsoever.
Your artistic career, then, it started in school?
Very, very early on. I feel very fortunate. Again, it's only with hindsight, when you look back and you see things, but I had a very good friend. So a little bit before Linda and Drama Club, I had a school friend who's actually a very, very well-respected writer, gardening writer called Leah Leenditz. And we were friends at school at the age of sort of 7, 8, 9. And we both decided, and I certainly inspired by her, decided that I wanted to write too. She knew she wanted to write, and I knew that I wanted to write too. And we were very close. And I remember she went along to this drama club, and I got invited to this performance, that part of the organisation, which is called ACTA, Avon Community Theatre Agency. It still exists in Bristol, and they had a performance, and I went to see it, and I was blown away by it. And I remember both of us joined the drama club at the same time. So I had this friendship with her, and I joined an extraordinary organisation that took kids from very, very diverse backgrounds, and they were telling us, you can do this. You know, I mean, when I look back, I feel very fortunate. One of the blessings in my life is to work with the composer Roderick Williams, and I've worked with him on 4 or 5 projects now at extraordinary locations and spaces, like from the South Bank to St Paul's Cathedral to the Tower of London. And when I look back at the roots of that work, one of the things that I had totally forgotten was that it was ACTA that gave me my first outing in terms of working with a composer. I found recently a handwritten manuscript that they had given me. I had written some words when I was about 11, 12, and they'd set them to music. And at the end of that process for a show, which was set in an outdoor swimming pool and was all about dreaming, I think it was called Wake Up and Dream, they gave me this score. And they said, would you like this? And I said, yes. And to see my name on it. Yeah. So every time I look at the scores with Roddy, I've worked with also a composer called Emily Levy. When I look at those, I remember the roots of that go back to them. So my friendship with Leah at school was absolutely foundational to, at the time, I wanted to be an actor. That was what everybody I thought I was going to do. And certainly in working with Linda and being sent for things like Eisteddfods and winning things. And at the age of 16 or 17, I'd won Best Senior Actress at the Bath Theatre Royal for a youth drama competition that I had, for which I both performed in the play and co-devised the play. And that got put in the local press. And again, that was where I knew that my work was headed somewhere to do with performance. But at that time, I thought I was going to be an actor. Yeah. And then poetry happened.
And then, I mean, listening to some of the performances you have done, like the whole accent thing didn't disappear. You're using the stuff, right? Sure. And it's also really interesting to hear of wanting to be in that life, knowing that it was somewhere in that life from such a young age, because I think I've said this to you before, like I feel I was doing stuff, but I didn't think it was a thing I could do by itself. Right. So that part came later, much later, for me. Now, I know a lot of your scholarship is about rereading the legacies of classic Black blues and jazz women as agents of social change, and also looking at some of the stuff you've done with photography archives and stuff. You're often dealing with, I guess, let me use one of the phrases I think you use, archives as hunted spaces, you know, things that we can leave our marks on, tell the stories that aren't, not necessarily that aren't being told, but maybe aren't being sufficiently centered. And I'm interested in when the lives of those women, the Bessie Smiths, the Billie Holidays, became something so compelling to you that you felt, I've got to study, you know, this, and how that has affected your practice and maybe your life, if that is also the case.
Oh, that's a really interesting question, and a big question that sort of spans, I think, Some of what I've talked about, and then, but if I fill in some of the gaps, I mean, I think that first of all, I started to listen to the music of those women and other musicians. I mean, series that you're referring to, I focus specifically on women, but I was listening to Charlie Parker at the time too, and I listened to as I listened to Charlie Parker, I met Billie Holiday because they were collaborators. So then I became fascinated by Lady Day. And I didn't know the things that I know now about her life. I grew up in a pre-internet era, but much of my education was a sonic education. I was listening. You know, I borrowed lots of cassette tapes from the local library. Sometimes teachers were kind enough to record things from vinyl to cassette via their record collections for us, particularly when we got further on into school. When I was in sixth form, that teachers would offer to do that. So I think in terms of the connection to those women, it feels like it's always been there because I was listening to them then. But my education, which is the other thing that you mentioned, formal knowledge about those women. Well, first of all, the informal knowledge, because I've been reading the field, if you like, for the best part of 25 years. And that's the work of Angela Davis introduced me to them. But then through my PhD, I began to read backwards and forwards in time. So I began to read women such as Cookie Woolner and Daphne Duval Harrison, Hazel Carby, etc. And that was when I began to formally understand this area of research and began to meditate on my own response to that as an English woman. I'm not American, I'm English responding to, but I'm an English Black woman and a Black woman of mixed heritage responding to this, and a queer Black woman of mixed heritage responding to this. And there's so many layers. And I think, you know, particularly if I reflect back to Carby's work, and Carby, as you know, looks at the concept of simultaneous oppression. She's doing this before Crenshaw's term intersectionality. And I'm so conscious of crediting them because those terms, as you know, get
bastardized and expanded beyond whatever it was in ways that were not.
Yeah, well, they get
intended.
taken from those women, and those women somehow aren't credited for the genesis of those terms. And so for me, those two, Carby, her notion of simultaneous oppressions, it helps me understand her work in terms of looking at the classic blues women. And it's definitely been a ley line alongside all those other names that I've mentioned in terms of a rationale for why it is I'm wanting to look, you know, at the subjects that I'm looking at within this work. Yeah.
A question I ask often is, what are some things which you would say you either learned or were taught, including by osmosis, about what it is to be a woman or a girl, which as you've gotten older, you've unpicked, unlearned, decided that doesn't belong to me?
I think so the easier one is the reverse of what you've just said. Is what is it that I've learned that was taught me earlier on in my life that actually I've come to understand was profound, or a lesson that I didn't necessarily understand it at the time. And one of those things would be walking away from things, turning your back on things. There's only so much time that we have in this life. My mother would often say to me, choose your battles. And that stays with me. Yeah, I will battle out some things, but other times I have one life that I know about. And I need to think about how I use that energy in this time. And sometimes that might mean I might turn my back on something and walk away from something. And there may feel like there's a price with regard to that. And I may not know what that price is. But actually, there's something in there that's really important in terms of affirming my own strength and my decision making and my sense of self-respect as a woman and as a Black woman. Now, back to your other question, which is the first of that. Unlearning. Something that I need to unlearn. Well, I think, yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think it's thinking and reflecting on the threads of what we've been talking about. I mean, the idea of careers advice that you should be one thing, or it should be a desk job, or that you have to know where you're going, are nonsense. You know, we are allowed to dream as people. We should be allowed to dream as people. And dreaming involves uncertainty, not being sure where the boundaries of things are or where the horizon of things is, but having a sensation that you need to go there. You kind of a sense of wanderlust, if you like. And I think that that's very important, to keep a hold of that and to know that those things are within your grasp or available to you. I mean, I think, yeah, maybe again, back to what you're saying, in beyond Linda Plummer and her brilliance and her affirmation of me, I had lots of instances of formative teachers who were not like her, who were the complete reverse, who were telling me as a working class kid that I wouldn't amount to much, or telling me that I was stupid, or telling me that I was this or that. There are many, many nesses of that, many instances that I have narrated publicly and that are private of instances where people were cruel or unkind, disrespectful. You know, I had an 80s education, so, it kind of went with the territory that there were many people who did not go through what I see now and hope to be the more rigorous processes of how teachers arrive in schools, that were bringing lots of behaviors that I believe would have sent them out of the system if they were to be in contemporary systems now. And I think I have done, with the assistance of people who were kind and good and positive mentors, I have undone some of that. But for sure, yeah, some of that comes up in days where I feel more tender in the world. Some of those old ghosts come up, and I have to do, and I remember then who have been affirmative and positive, and I remember there's another way of viewing things and viewing myself.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say and acknowledge that it happens, and
Sure.
that it happens to you,
Yes.
which might seem like a nothing thing to say, but like from where I'm standing, or from where someone younger is standing, who's like, yeah, but Rommi, you've been in the Houses of Parliament as a right-in residence, you've done this, nobody else has been there. Why would you have, even if you have a tender day, why would that be a day where you feel, less in those ways, given all the things that you've accomplished? But it's a human thing.
It's a human thing, isn't it? I mean, and one of the great joys on that note, bringing it full circle, was when I was stood on the steps of Westminster Hall and I was addressing a full capacity audience in Westminster Hall. And of course, as we know, this is a place where royal bodies lay in state. This is a place where prime ministers, popes, and presidents stand to address audiences. But I, as the poet, was able to address that audience. And that fascinates me politically in my life. If ever I was to do a resume or a kind of a reflection backwards of my life, it definitely, I think there's something about creativity, given where I come from and who I come from and the journey that I've had to get here. I think there's something profound about being able to access those places and spaces by virtue of what it is I do.
Yeah.
And that primarily begins with poetry.
Yeah, and that kind of epitomizes something you said somewhere else, where you said writing for you is a refusal to be disappeared.
Yeah, that was, I think, a Mosaic interview that I did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, and it's not just, I have to say, just to expand that statement out, it's not ever just about me, because one of the things that you just mentioned in the setup to this question is that I work with archival voices. So on the project with Roderick Williams at the Tower of London, I was working with Black Tudor voices. So I was working with Reasonable Black Man. That was his name, or his known name, Reasonable Black Man, which I meditate on in the poem libretto. Luce Bainham, who was rumoured to be the inspiration for the Dark Lady of the Sonnets, is rumoured to have been Shakespeare's lover. And I love to work with perhapsing, what Lisa Knopf calls perhapsing, supposing the idea of taking fact and the interstitial kind of, it's not fiction, but it's that kind of interstitial positionality between the two. So faction. I love to work with archival documents. And in that case, it was the Dark Lady Sonnets. It was everything that I could lay my hands on archivally of Luce Bainham and weaving that together into a sonnet libretto, which was sung by an extraordinary soprano called Nardis Williams, and who was accompanied by an extraordinary instrumentalist, Elizabeth Kenny. So that's key. It's not just about me doing something for myself. I see what I do as a scholar and as an academic and as a writer as being in service of invisibilities across time. And that whilst I have breath, or whilst I have spark or energy, my desire is to spotlight.
Yeah. And that is important. I know, like in workshops, particularly with younger poets, as it was told to me much early on, I'm always reinforcing the fact that even when we're speaking about ourselves, it's not just as in whenever you're eyeing, but also when you're speaking about yourself. Once you've decided to commit it to the poem, it's not you, it's a character, and you're in service of the poem, although, you know, the emotion of whatever it is true. So that when I do eyes or my mother or whatever, I'm like, they're many mothers. One of them might be mine, but I'm never just writing about my mother.
Yeah.
Because my personal at some point needs, I'm aware of how it goes, how it becomes something outside of me and my body, so that it matters to somebody more than just me, and so that it carries something that I also know is bigger than me, in a way that when I go back to it, even if I've personally moved on, it still has a life that makes some kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Age obviously happens.
Well,
We pass through time. I think it was Maya Angelou who says she was talking about we get older, but we don't necessarily get wiser. We just pay homage to credit cards and bills and mortgages and things like that. And I'm always interested in the season in which we step into ourselves as women. In hindsight, because I don't know that anybody actually knows in the instant that it's happening that this is when I'm stepping into not the final version, but maybe the part that starts the other grown-up version parts of myself. But yeah, the question is, in what season would you say you stepped into your womanhood, and what were some of the things that were happening at the time?
It's a really tricky thing. I mean, if I answer you honestly, I don't think there is just one season in which I step into myself sense of being a woman. I'm doing that all the time. And I think one of the things that I feel is a great pleasure. I love rehearsal rooms. I love the rehearsal process. In some ways, I love it as much as the performance itself. There's a sense of intimacy, I think, that exists between collaborators in a rehearsal space of fun and play, and of less fear of the mistake within the rehearsal space. So the reason why I mention all of that is because it's those spaces that I connect with my girl self, my younger self. And really what I mean is that I connect with play and I connect with fun. And so when you ask me the question, what is the season in which I step into my sense of womanhood, I would say I'm always doing that, but I'm also always in different ways, depending on what project I'm working on and what part of that project we are in. I am always in some way stepping into my girlhood, into my earlier selves. And those are continuums, and I carry all of them. I'm not too sure I agree with Dr. Angelou, Professor Angelou, I have to say. That she wasn't sure that when we become older, we become wiser. But I don't know the context of the quote.
No,
But
it's a wiser quote, but I also think there are lots of examples of people who have just gotten older and refused the wisdom that should have come.
well, I don't know if I've refused the wisdom either. I'm not too sure. I think that there is something. So there's a Freudian concept. That I remember from Paulo Freire, I think it is, who talks about educator becoming educatee in the spirit of Easter. And that stays with me, that idea of a sort of cyclical something that's happening where one, a bit like a forward roll, where one is rolling into one sense of, and if you imagine, I mean, we used to do this all the time as kids on the little kind of hillside near our school. We would forward roll down it and tumble forward. And that was one of the beauties of being younger, is not fear. Well, certainly for us, not fearing that we might break anything, or we're just, tumbling or cartwheeling. But that forward roll, that sort of sense of that, I think about, and I reflect on your question, and I think all the things that, I think I was a wise kid. There was lots about me that was very intuitive, very, very smart, even if that might not have been recognized by some of the teachers that I had, but I was smart and I had to be. And I learned very early on how to read rooms, etc., and how to be resourceful, back to the word that we started this conversation with. But I think also, I do believe that age garners wisdom, because you've lived stuff, you see stuff, you learn stuff by virtue of your existence. And whether you choose to dump that or discard that or rewrite that or whatever is your agency to do that. But I do think that, I think I am young and older. Time.
Yeah, in terms of when I asked the question and saying even when you step in, it's normally a moment of hindsight and the moment where it began. That was for me an awareness or recognition of the fact that this is something that you keep stepping into. I hope for most people that is not something that happens and stops. But I guess oftentimes, at least for me, I feel like there was a season where there was a heightened awareness that maybe came about of whatever my capacity was. Not that it didn't exist before that, but I wasn't given it enough status or credence, or I was allowing other voices to knock it out way easier. But there was a season where I started to step into a better awareness, a better understanding of those things, so that yes, I am able to go back and play with the girl that was, but now with more awareness, that is what I'm doing, and that I'm allowed to, to
Sure.
have fun and to enjoy her.
I think I'm hearing your experience, and I respect your experience, and I hear it. I think I feel my experience is different in the sense that I'm not too sure there was a season, as in singular. I think there are seasons of epiphany or insight. It might be where I realize, for instance, that I need to change direction on something. That actually, this way of being or working. I mean, I think certainly going back to the PhD process, I mean, I totally did that to serve my writing. Totally did it because I wanted to deepen my knowledge to make me a better writer. That's why. So that would be a kind of juncture or turning point. coming to Leeds, which is the city where I live, that would also be another. I had come here with the intention of really just staying a year to train to be a teacher. And I wasn't even sure that I wanted to do that, but I realized very quickly in the third year of my first degree that working class kids with degrees don't get jobs. I had no body to pay for a gap year. I was staring in the face going back to work at the same supermarket I had done throughout my A levels. And I didn't want to do that. So somebody suggested, it was a serendipitous conversation where somebody said to me, "Have you thought about teaching?" "Oh, I don't know if I want to do that." And then a friend's brother, I always remember, really, really one of those sliding door conversations, really, really important. And he looked at me and he said, "What have you got to lose?" He said, "It'll actually be about 9 months of your life." And he said, "When you've got it, you've got it. And no one can take it away from you." And actually, it was a really important conversation because I went on to do that. And actually, teaching and learning how to teach has taught me how to run workshops, how to publicly speak, how to construct argument, how to present, all of those things, how to relate to people, how to read rooms, how to do the work that I'm doing within the mental health system. So there are so many ways in which I return to that formal experience of learning how to teach. So to answer your question in a long, convoluted way, there are various seasons. There are iterations of seasons. I think I experience many springs. I experience many winters. I experience many autumns and many summers. And there's something cyclical about it. And it's usually my awareness occurs when I need to change something.
What does it mean for you to be at rest?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think particularly as a freelance creative, what does it mean to be at rest? Because I think sometimes there can feel like it can get challenged and I have to make time for that. And it becomes, because my writing is not, many people have said this, so this is not new, but writing is not a job. It's how I exist in the world. As many people, it's how I exist in the world. If I'm doing other things, I constantly think about writing. I constantly think about how I'm seeing the world. Anytime I journey anywhere, it's how I occupy the world. So I can't switch off from that. It's not like there's no downtime. It's like I don't hand my pass in and kind of check out. There just are kind of more intense moments of production, if you like, and others which are more ambient, if you like. And that is, but rest, how do I rest? I think that's the question.
Yes.
I rest by going to see films. There's a little cinema that I go to that is not far, and I take the walk there. And I have little rituals. Assist my writing, and they're really about feeding my writing, but they're not necessarily the act of physically writing. So I will walk, I will sometimes run, I will take trains. So I find that I think on trains. There's something about that movement. I love the motion of them. I love the peripheral view. I love the overhearing conversations, etc., etc. I also will read. That's how I rest. I read. And I go to see theatre. It's different creative ways that connect me to what I love, which are words, but I'm not necessarily the one in that moment producing them, but it's all feeding my brain. Yeah, that's how I rest and sleep.
Yeah, so I'm glad that made a mention,
But sometimes that, if I'm working on something, that can be challenged. But yeah, sleep for sure.
What scares you?
Oh, what scares me? I think there are two immediate things. The loss of people I love. That is a profound experience. And I think as I get older, I'm meeting that more.
Yeah.
Last year, I was the loss of somebody very dear to me. And I think that, yeah, I'm still reflecting on that very deeply. It was just in September. So I think that, yeah, I think the deaths of people who I care very deeply about and that I love. And then I think it's also wanting a sense of I do all the things that I'm here to do while I have the time on this plane. I don't want to, I think I fear regret in relation to my own creativity. I think that's what I fear. And I work very hard not to have that.
Yeah. The world is a bit of a mad place right now. Maybe it always is, but more so than usual.
Mm-hmm.
How do you cultivate hope?
I think, and of course, I'm in making this comment, by the way, I don't want to diminish the magnitude of those monolithic, profoundly painful, seismic conflicts that are happening in parts of the world right now as we talk. So I'm not speaking to those. I'm speaking more personally, although I appreciate I exist in a world where those things are happening, but I'm not in them.
Yeah.
I'm very mindful of my relative privilege in terms of proximity. But I would say, how do I cultivate hope? Is back to that resourcefulness, is to remember how I've been taught by people, particularly, although not always, it's been the women in my life that have taught me how to make something from nothing,
Right.
which is what we do as poets all the time. As creators, we conjure from what doesn't exist until we make it so. And how to make in circumstances of difficulty. And how to, yeah, that is how I cultivate hope. I remember that I have my own difficulties in this life and sorrows in this life, and I'm here. And one of the things that I think is fundamental to how I exist in the world, how I perceive the world, how I see the world, and therefore that is a shaping force in particularly the work that I do in the mental health system with various people, is a reminder that this thing that we call poetry, this sometimes tiny but magnificent portal of insight that I see as a refrain, people who I meet in the mental health system, who often I'm meeting them at points in their lives where they do not feel wise, where they do not feel strong, where they are sometimes more often than not questioning their own existence. And there is something that happens, and I see it, and it is a source of incredible beauty. It's a privilege to see it, is when somebody does one of two things, and this is where I draw hope, because I see it, is where they find from somebody else's words and experience a source of affirmation, support, insight, or they find a language for what has happened to them. and they are able to name it. So I'm in a ley line to Lord here, about poetry's function is to give name to the nameless so that it can be thought. I see people do that all the time, and that is extraordinary as a moment of encounter to see how people narrate their lives in their own words, on their own terms. And so that gives me a profound sense of hope about the world in those spaces where I witness that. And I have a privilege to facilitate spaces where that is so.
And when you are working in those health spaces, people's mental health, women, what is principally your function there? Is it to help them to tell their stories? Is it to let me not put words in your mouth. What is your function?
The function is, I was an NHS writer in residence 13 years ago for a particular healthcare trust. But before that, I had worked in various different areas in creative or as part of creative projects as a writer. And further back in time than that, actually, not long after I came to Leeds, about sort of 4 or 5 years after that, I was asked to be a writer on a project that was working with women who are survivors of domestic violence. So throughout my life, I have worked in context with women who are survivors, women who are processing trauma. And it is in those contexts. And my work in those contexts is to support as a writer. And it's everything from creating bespoke resources that respond to whatever themes the woman in question, in the case of the projects that are concerned with women, that she is bringing into the space. And it will be, it's kind of like an apothecary. That's why, I kind of often think it's a bit like finding a poem that meets her, something she said, as a mirror, and offering it to see if it is the right reflection. If it does, because it might not, but usually there's something in it that's a point of connection. Recently, we were doing lots of work in a project around body image, how one sees one's body. And one of the poems that I use often in that context is Derek Walcott's Love After Love. And it has that idea of looking at oneself in a mirror and meeting oneself with kindness and remembering to love back that reflection. So those things like that are, Sharon Old's Language of the Brag, which is such an important, powerful poem in terms of affirming birth. And I asked the question, if we were to regard birth as we do war, how might the world be different?
Yeah, that is a big question.
Yeah.
We have spoken a lot about women, girls too, who have influenced you and been part of your life in different ways. What is sisterhood to you, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I have to say immediately when you say that now, I have the wonderful singer-songwriter Sarah Jane Morris's album, The Sisterhood, in my head, which is, she just launched part 2 or album 2 of that sequence that she's writing. And I adore her work. I think she's an incredible songwriter who is praising women musicians of the past and present. Through her work. So there's a ley line connection with our work, but she's doing something very unique and different and just beautiful. So that's the kind of sonic that I have in my head. And she's written a beautiful track about Bessie Smith that's playing in my head as I talk to you. Is sisterhood important to me? Yes, of course it is. Absolutely, it's important to me. It's important to me because we live still in a world that is rife with misogyny and misogynoir and intersections of that. So yes, sisterhood is important to me. I mean, I love women. In terms of my personal relationships, yes, of course, sisterhood is important. Yeah. I have a sister, and she is profoundly important to me and one of the loves of my life. I think sisterhood and solidarity is important because of misogyny and misogynoir and other intersectional discriminations concerning gender. Is important in the workplace. It's important in life to see each other. That for me feels very important. I also think on a broader level, there have been men who have been part of my creative process that I have to acknowledge, and one of them being my editor, for instance. But there are other creatives, musicians that I work with, directors that I work with who are men. So there's something about humanhood here. I don't want to get wishy because I understand the premise of your question. Yes, to answer your question, yes, sisterhood is very important to me, without a doubt. Also, my relationships with people are important. And in some cases, in many cases, it might be the case that those people, whether they define as women or not, have been fundamental to a process in which I am telling a story in collaboration with them that is about sisterhood.
Okay. You mentioned earlier when I asked what you were scared of about not finishing the work you have to do, and that may or may not relate to this question, which is, do you ever think about legacy? And if you do, what do you want yours to be?
Well, that is a really interesting question. I think I don't get to control what happens in the afterwards of me. I can control some things through things like a will and through conversations that I have with people, but I can't get to control. But I have begun to think, and this isn't just in the recent, it's been a long conversation I've been having with myself, particularly since I've become more engaged with projects that concern archival research. And that's been for at least a decade and a half. I mean, certainly for the duration of my doctoral research, but certainly maybe just before that, with archiving, how we archive ourselves. And I think that comes to the fore through the Speaking Volumes project that we've both been part of, the thinking about how Black women are archived, the idea of working with those young archivists who are doing exactly that in their practice. It's really important. Yeah. So yes, I've begun to think about that very, very much. And yeah, there are various conversations I'm having with myself that I know what it is I need to do, but it's about doing them. Yeah.
And my final question is, what brings you joy?
Ooh, well, I moved house about 18 months ago, coming up to 18 months ago. And whilst there's a lot to do to the house, what brings me joy is the sun coming through the window around about 4 o'clock. And then I understand why it is that I bought the house. I can, yeah, it's a joy to feel that sunlight and to understand how that transforms this space. So that brings me joy. Conversations with my sister bring me joy. The conversations that I have with many members of my broader family, particularly in the afterwards of my mother's death, my conversations with my aunt, sometimes I just, when I go and visit her, sit with her.
Yeah.
And we just have these long conversations that don't intend to be, but they are. And they, usually involve my uncle going out to say, oh, should I go and get some chips? And he'll go out and get some chips, and me and my aunt continue to have this long conversation, and I get to maybe hear things that I didn't know about their lives as siblings, or bits about my family. Those things, that brings me joy. Love brings me joy. Books bring me joy. Connecting with creativity in a way that reminds me of what's beautiful in the world brings me an immense and profound joy. I have an allotment. Growing fruit and vegetables brings me joy. And the community, which is a very diverse community around that allotment, which I marvel at, brings me an immense and profound joy. Daffodils that are currently in the garden bring me an immense and profound joy. Seeing them, taking a walk through woods brings me joy, and feeling that I have time to watch the world go by and observe it brings me also an immense joy. And then also back to the work that I was talking to you about, what also brings me an immense, just profound joy is being in a situation where I can watch somebody unraveling a knot that they were in through some part of this creative process that might be dismissed as sort of, if from people who are peripheral to it, as somehow superfluous. But actually, for the people that know, it is foundational. It's as important in tandem with other things that are within that system. That's an immense joy that I have.
Thank you. I love the way that things come back up repeatedly, both in the sense of purpose, even though we haven't used that word once through this conversation, but in the way that you have spoken about many things and your part in it, and your aim in doing it. Yeah, just a lot to learn, I guess.
The questions, I really appreciate them. Yeah, and your time.